If you are a driver, you are in the number one profession in the world. The reality is the idea that you can travel safer, more conveniently. You can now make cars 100% productive. You can buy a car and an asset and put that to work. You can bring down the cost of every logistical industry. So you suddenly go, okay, if we displace 15% of the world's population, what happens then?
How do we make everybody who have, I think, a natural disposition of fear and of distrust towards AI, how are we going to get people to accept that I'm now going to go sit in the back of a car with no driver in front?
It was famously said by Steve Jobs when asked what is a brand, he would say a brand is simply trust. Building trust happens over time, and it is done by just relentless, consistent meeting expectations and promises. In this week's Memes and Machines, we go from Cheshire to San Francisco. Why did Catty say, if LinkedIn was a town, it would be San Francisco? We talk about metrics, marketing for vanity or marketing for practicality. How do we get that balance right? We explore Catty's first soiree in an autonomous vehicle. A step into the future. How did he feel about that, and what does this mean for all of us? And finally, we talk about trust. How do you build trust in a complex environment that we all live in, where the distinction between real and fake is harder to determine? And how do we do that as individuals?
We did it one episode without mentioning Farcaster.
Mate, you said that last time. You can't go Farcaster again. You can't ruin it. You know Jay's going to put the word Farcaster in.
I didn't mention it. We didn't talk about it.
Fair. And we did say innovation, we said the future, we said San Fran, and didn't mention Farcaster, so you raise a good point. Catman, it is good to see you.
Great to see you as well. Ollie, how are you doing? How was your week in New York? We were two ships passing in the night last week.
You keep your extracurriculum activity to yourself, Catman. This is not to be broadcast on, not live. This format is not for those stories. But to cut a long story short, really good, very busy, really good. And how about yourself? Cheshire meets San Francisco. I think that'd make a good episode today. Hearing about your tales.
Yeah. Hearing my tales in San Francisco. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably the only place in the world you really get like a concentrated peek into the future. Like you have the highest concentration of, founders and builders who are thinking like 10, 20, 30 years ahead. And so you always walk away feeling very inspired and energized, despite, the city has some issues. I think if you cast those to one side, it is still and will always be, I think, an incredibly inspiring and insightful place for anybody working in marketing, tech, or whatever.
All empires fall, my man. I would say that there are some extremely challenging governance issues, the homeless situation, all of those things. But we're not here to talk about that. You said to me a phrase before, if San Fran was a place or like a social media app, it's like, oh no, if LinkedIn was a town or city, it would be San Francisco. That's what you said. Explain.
I mean, look, it's somewhere that, anyone you meet, the first question they ask you is always going to be what you do and who you work for. And I think that feels like, in the US, that feels like generally true as well. But New York is definitely more of a, you are your own person first before you are your kind of identity really being tied to your work. But yeah. San Francisco takes it to another level, and it's really a place of people who are looking to make it in the professional arena, and that's kind of all they're focused on. It's all they're working on. And it's reflected even down to the environment, right? So like if you think about some of the big, buildings, it's like the Salesforce Tower. Like people, know it as the building that Salesforce own, and they're situated in. They're almost these cathedrals to capitalism that dominate the skyline. And then you also have, you're surrounded by billboards that you would only see in San Francisco. So billboards, there's like 5 billboards in a row for different project management CRM platforms. And I'm just thinking, 99% of the people who drive past this every day has no idea what this does or who it's for. But you have this kind of such a heavy concentration of tech workers and builders that they end up playing almost these kind of status games with their out-of-home marketing. And so, yeah, it's a very unique place where you're kind of constantly, hammered by productivity and tech workflows and things that you don't really think exist outside of your professional bubble. And then when you go into San Francisco, suddenly it's everywhere. It's like really laid out in front of you. So it's a fascinating place that really gets you locked in for a week.
A real world echo chamber by the sounds of things. And to steal your phrase, I suppose those little adverts selling the same thing next to each other are like pissing in the wind. It just, I do think you raise a point though around, and it takes me back as you were describing that scenario. It takes me back to a time when I used to be involved in media, and in media planning, you'll be surprised how many decisions are made purely for vanity. And one story I'll tell you, one of Group M's, Mediacom's largest clients was JD Sport, JD Group. And one of the things that they used to do around planning their out of home was make sure that the CEO's route was filled with ads. So imagine the drive home of the CEO, it was just filled with JD ads. I think a lot about our time with Social Chain, and we would work with the Boohoo Group, and everything was pursuit of vanity. Grow this. We need scale. We need to grow. We need 1 million followers in the next 3 months. Figure it out. It was always these, not the worst strategy in the world when social proof is a real thing. But it does raise a bigger question around marketing for efficacy to be effective or marketing for ego. What's your perspective, and how do you find that balance between doing stuff that you're really proud of, you put on your fridge and say, hey mom, look at me, I did that, versus the stuff that is probably quietly invisible in the background doing wonders?
Yeah, it's a really good one, because there's a very delicate balance between the two, and there's nothing to say that they also can't both work, right? And solve each other. Like, another good example I would say is competitors, right? Like because we're so, we're in our bubble and we're constantly looking at competitors, we will also make sure our marketing is doing stuff which makes our competitors feel the heat, right? Like, they've signed these customers. We want to almost drown them in, almost demotivate them, right? Because they're winning so much. That's true. Like, and it's a strategy we've had. Like, how do we demotivate our customers and our competitors, and they feel like, this team are winning. They're getting they're winning clients. They're shipping really fast. And a lot of me is like, is that actually the right thing we should be doing? Like, should we really be worrying about like what our competitors think, or should we just be like, head forward? But actually, I think sometimes you end up, winning anyway by doing that. Sometimes that it is actually the right thing, and putting your billboard outside the kind of CEO's route home, that's probably a step maybe too far in that direction. But at the end of the day, it is, you're showing up in as many places as possible. You're raising that awareness. I think the answer is that you need to be, as long as the product is moving and you have like measurable tactics that you can scale that are growing. I think sometimes, as long as you have that running and it's working, there's nothing wrong with a bit of vanity, because it does really, I think awareness within your echo chamber is at times important, and that perception of your brand is important, as long as you are getting like real results further down the funnel.
I didn't realize how 1 week of Catman in San Francisco would turn you into a capitalistic monster, talking about hands on keyboard, taking down the competition, drowning them out. Guy's been watching Suits or something on the plane home, right?
Startups are tough, man. Startups are tough.
It's about... No, I do think it's an interesting debate, and often it's always interesting. I think a lot about what we champion on LinkedIn We are a B2B business, and when I think about our own marketing, we always think through the lens of our buyers. Is this the thing that is going to make Jenny, who works at X brand that we want to work with, pick up the phone and call us? And the idea being is, are we giving her value or answering a question that she doesn't currently have? Or are we producing work that she sees that she wishes she did do? You know, all of those things are part of like us driving fame for Flight Story. What I will say is we often judge work in isolation and we have no understanding of the goal. So take the media planning example where you follow the CEO the route on the way out. Imagine if you're trying to fundraise, right? And you have a very specific institutional investor that you want to get the attention of. Actually, in isolation, that wouldn't seem like an effective tactic. I'm just going to do some out of home with my very limited budget before I do a fundraise. However, there is a world where that could be the single most effective thing you could absolutely do. In the same way we talk about Super Bowl ads, the most competitive environment, you have the world's attention in front of you. What do you do with that attention? Well, Kanye West won this year because he did something very smart. He was juxtaposed to everything else. You know, I think a lot about Reddit. Reddit basically didn't do much advertising, but they had this resurgence of adoption during COVID as people were like getting onto forums and maybe had more time. And they decided to do a Super Bowl that year. And basically just put up this short, like, hey, we spent all our money. Cliche, classic. Yeah. But that was driving fame and infamy. And I assume it hit the objectives. But I do think there's a broader point of, like, we don't always have context. So seemingly ineffective, vanity-based metrics and goals might actually be the most effective thing you can do. I think about it like social following. When someone says to you, we need to grow our social following, it seems like such a vacuumous thing. And I always say why. You need to get to the root of why does someone want that as a goal? And the number of times people used to come to us and say, I want to grow Instagram or I want to grow TikTok. And really that shouldn't be the goal, but God, it is a helpful byproduct. You do get the category attention. It does seem in social media, like take Ryanair. When you look at the data, Ryanair get more attention and more earned coverage than every airline combined on TikTok. Put that into context. That's every single airline combined probably have a social team, probably are spending ad dollars there, probably deploying a lot of resource. And Ryanair, who tripled down, found their formula, found their voice, connected with people in their own way, it's very authentic, and they fundamentally win. But if the objective was like, you know, we're going to just win TikTok, people would have gone, why? You know, at the time? But I'd imagine when you're thinking of recall and, you know, all these many these variables that influence our decisions, that's probably not the worst tactic in the world. So to cut a long story short, you are a ruthless guy off the back of San Fran. But I would say we don't always have context to decide if something is a good decision or a bad decision in marketing.
Yeah, I would say just a general rule is like ego is a really bad place to start for you know, determining your marketing goals. Like I think we saw it a lot when we did, you know, with Social Chain, where we'd have a lot of founders come to us, like you said, about growing their apps following. And I think it came from a place of ego, that they want that awareness and growth actually before they had a product or before they had users. And it doesn't really work that way around. It's like Ryanair are able to go, they're able to go out on TikTok and get the highest reach of any other airline because they have a massive existing user base and a very clear product of why you should shop with them. And so, like, I think founders get it the wrong way around, right? Where they're focused, like, how do we get more followers on Instagram? Let's do a competition with Kim Kardashian, right? Yeah. I say it to my team all the time. I can go out and get us 200,000 followers tomorrow on Twitter if we really wanted, but they're not going to be the right followers. It's going to be a lot of low quality bullshit and they're not going to stick around. And so, like, it's this very careful balance you have of, yes, it's a byproduct, but it's usually a byproduct of, you know, a great product and a very clear mission.
Yeah, you're right about enablers. There's a time and a place for different goals. I don't know if you've seen the Specsavers ad doing the rounds this week. So basically, Specsavers have put a car, crashed it on top of like one of those posts in the middle of the road. And the only reason that works is because they've had the same strap line for 20 years, should have gone to Specsavers, and they've just shown up with this same identity in different ways and refreshed that timelessly for the last 20 years. So that's why, in isolation, this seemingly random activation holds all the weight. But it had to be enabled by the thing first, which was a solid brand and identity and, decades long of great marketing.
Exactly.
Dude, you said in your time in San Fran, you did something quite special. You had an opportunity to go in a driverless car. We talk about AI all the time. What was that experience like?
I mean, yeah, this is definitely the most excited I've been about AI, probably, since
Really?
since I played Mid-Journey for the first time. No, I think this was the first time, I'm really seeing its, practical use cases. And for me was one of those, you probably can like remember a few times in your life when you used a piece of technology that you had this like light bulb, like, oh, this is like the future. This is really where we're going. Like maybe the first time you used the iPhone, maybe the first time you discovered YouTube. This was really one of those moments for me where I realized in 10, 20, 30, however long it might be, years, this is probably what most cars are going to look like. So it's kind of like Uber, you hail this car, it arrives to you, there's no driver in it. You sit in the back seat. It's a very nice car, which helps as well, but it's you put in your destination, and the really smart thing is that it has a little screen in front of you, which shows you exactly what the car's seeing. The car is mapping its area around it itself, completely 360 degree. It can see cars exactly where they are. It can see people exactly where they are, obstacles. It's mapping out every single thing in real time and then showing you how it's reacting and what it's doing to get you to your destination. And the ride was 10 times smoother than any other taxi I've been in because it's able to spot things, significantly quicker than humans can. I didn't have to have small talk, which for me was a big win. It was just like a great experience, and for me solves what is probably one of the biggest issues that humanity faces, which is road traffic accidents. Like probably something that kind of doesn't get talked about as much because it's we decided that we're making this trade-off for what is a massive convenience to humans. We're going to make this trade-off that hundreds of thousands of people are going to die every year, and this solves that. I think it's like an 85% reduction in car accidents per ride with a driverless car. And so I got really excited, but at the same time, I realized there's this kind of long, frustrating road ahead. And it isn't a technology problem. It's going to be a PR and comms problem. It's going to be a marketing problem. How do we make people who have, I think, a natural, disposition of fear and of distrust towards AI, how are we going to get people to accept that I'm now going to go sit in the back of a car with no driver in front? Because I think it gives you this feeling to some people of a lack of control. Like there's nobody there with their hands on the wheel's turning for you, which is, immediately this, like, you have this kind of abrasive reaction to that. And so I think the most compelling thing we're going to see in the next 5-10 years is how do we solve that challenge? How do we get people to feel comfortable sitting in one of these?
Firstly, I really want to get in a driverless car now, the way you describe it. And I think it's a beautiful articulation. As you were saying that, you kind of go through those moments in history and it is like stepping into the future. And I imagine this was a really meaningful one in the sense that it like really is an awe moment and probably a very memorable one. And you're right, human beings, we are emotional. This more often than not, policies don't win elections. People with great stories do, right? Or a story that half the country feel is great and half the country feels is not, right? That's like how it's human nature. And it's really interesting when you talk about the sector. I do think there's two parts to this one specifically. One of the things I'm concerned about, I get asked all the time about jobs. What jobs do I think AI will displace altogether? And, we work in the marketing industry and the technology industry, and I think the industry is filled with bright, great thinkers, creatives, great communicators, and these are all skills that I think are going to see us well into the future. So I tend to think for our industry, it will simply, jobs will evolve. Some will, of course, go, many will be created, but most of all, I think jobs will just evolve. Where I fundamentally think there will be a tectonic shift is things like this, driving. Because you're right, what you're describing is far superior by every objective measure possible than what we currently have. In the same way the car was so much better than a horse, the reality is the idea that you can travel safer, more conveniently. Yep. Something like most cars are stationary 95% of the time, they're unproductive. You can now make cars 100% productive. You can buy a car and an asset and put that to work, so you can make them investments. You can bring down the cost of every logistical industry, from haulage, shipping, you name it, just all of these innovations. The cost burden is reduced drastically, which has a huge impact on business. The problem, if you are a driver, you are in the number one profession in the world. The number one profession in the world is driving. So you suddenly go, okay, if we displace 15% of the world's population and take them out of a job fundamentally, because the solution now is so much better, so much safer, what happens then? And obviously, memes and machines is not going to solve that question. We're not going to put that question to bed, but they're the things I do worry about. So I actually have, as someone that appreciates technology, and I am like you in awe of what we are seeing, in every sense of the word, I do have some concerns. But you raised a point there about this is a PR battle and a comms battle. So let's park the safeguarding humanity and jobs and all of those things for a second and go back to comms. I think we're in a world now where trust is really at an all-time low. And I say I know objectively, there's one of the best studies on trust by sector is done by Edelman, large comms company. And they do the trust barometer. Is something that they've been producing for years and years, and it looks at every sector and looks at how trusted is this industry. And as you would expect, politicians, media, as you would expect, advertising, banking, you name it, everybody, trust is at an all-time low. So you kind of look at that and you think of the environment in which we're communicating in, one geared by algorithms, where everyone's either outraged or attention-seeking, or the most extreme opinion garners all the attention and keeps everyone hooked. Suddenly, you go, well, I understand why trust is an all-time low, but then as marketeers, how the hell do we communicate effectively in these environments? Everything's sensationalized. You think of what's happening with the royal family now and the hysteria that goes around, and is this an AI video, or is this real, or is this just a tragedy? You can't name a major talking point that isn't just being contested in one way or another. And the voices of mistrust are just louder and louder and louder. How the hell do companies compete in this space? What games can you play? Talk us through the Catman's trust barometer. How are we building trust today?
It's really difficult, isn't it? I feel like we're now seeing the combination of these issues all playing out at once, where the Kate Middleton thing was really interesting because you had the combination of an institution which is a little bit quiet and a little bit kind of not shady, but they're not super transparent.
It's a black box.
Guarded.
It's a black box.
It's a black box. Yeah. So you had that coming, and then you have this we're in the first innings of AI, and so you have this huge amount of speculation around we're being fed images by official sources, but they don't look quite right, or they look slightly doxed in some way. And then, we now have this, when I see an image online, this is the crazy thing. My first reaction is probably not real. The crazy thing was when the when the royal family released a video of Kate obviously addressing the issue, my first reaction was, this isn't real, because I didn't quite see the verified tag. I just didn't, I hadn't quite processed that it was from an official source. It was like a quote tweet. I was like, oh, this is an AI video of Kate Middleton. I said, that's a crazy shift that's happened there, when my first reaction to something is probably not real. And so there just has to now be a completely different set of rules and set of guidelines for how we operate these things. I don't really know what the answer is. I saw somebody also do a really interesting report on Facebook. So I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook now. It tends to be where, people in Oliver's age bracket spend their time. And but one thing that's, somebody did a report on their feed being predominantly AI images, and it's like kind of like ridiculous things like two grandmas next to a cake, and it's like a cake that they've baked, right? Like it's like feels like very harmless, innocuous content, but it's like a farm of this kind of content, right? And it's not real, but it has hundreds of thousands of reactions by, older people saying, "Oh wow, amazing, great cake. Can I get the recipe?" And there are these now content farms which are just like spewing this stuff out there at scale with no moderation and no verification whatsoever, and everyone believes it because these people don't have the mental models to think about that this could be an image that has been created by a computer. And it just, honestly, this combined with then like the Twitter algorithm is like another thing that I'm struggling with, where I'm getting fed a lot of like right-wing conspiracy theorist content, and there's this just like melting pot of chaos now that surrounds any public incident that happens. And it's getting to a stage where it might just get out of control. And I think some kind of digital content verification system has to now, that becomes a standard. I think that needs to be put in place. I don't know what that looks like. I've seen a lot of people suggest that the blockchain is some answer here, where, we take a photo and it's minted on the blockchain at source, like the minute you take that photo, and then therefore you can prove further down the line that it is the original asset. There's a few different solutions I've seen, but I think we're in a very dangerous time where this lack of trust is going to keep plummeting.
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that it's only going to get more complex. And we've said this before, we've had the conversation around, in a generative AI world, the distinction between real and fake is horrendously blurred. If it wasn't already, if you think of the current media landscape, I would say, and it was famously said by Steve Jobs when asked, what is a brand? He would say, a brand is simply trust. That was his description. It's a promise. And and every interaction, we who create brands, products and services, every interaction we have is either a deposit of trust into that trust bank account or a withdrawal, every bad experience. And I'd like to draw on your experience, because you work in a nascent industry that, is very low trust because there are so many bad actors and it's so anchored to like degen culture and internet culture. So you're operating in a really weird environment and have done from the start. And you said earlier, there's maybe this temptation to chase quick thrills, but you don't. You laser focused on content marketing and really driving long-term returns. And there's probably faster routes to get adoption or things that you could be doing. Talk to me about like the better way as opposed to the faster way, because I think that's in part your greatest line of defense. Because I think you're right in saying there isn't anything any of us can do to change the environment. But what we can do is act with a level of consistency and not fall into certain dangerous traps that marketeers do. And we started this conversation with whether that was chasing the wrong metrics, chasing vanity, looking for cheap thrills. How have you thought about the positioning of Third Web as a new company to try and gain trust in a very mistrusting environment?
Yeah, it's I think a good analogy to think about as well is Coinbase, who, and this is not necessarily marketing, but when they talk about their growth in the industry, they did everything by the books. They did everything very kind of, high trust. We're not going to cut any corners. We're going to follow all the regulations. And the CEO said, we were growing slower than our competitors for a long time. We were frustrated. We couldn't work out, like, well, why aren't we growing as quickly as our competitors? And then one by one, their competitors, you know, CEOs put in jail, scandal after scandal after scandal, which completely destroyed their trust one by one. And it was like, only was then did we get the validation that actually the slow, regulatory way was the right way to win in the long term. And I think it's the same in an industry like this when it comes to your marketing and your positioning. In the short term, we can do, win crypto competitions. We can do memes, things that like will get us that quick engagement hit. But actually, it's about building a high trust, precise, knowledgeable brand, which I think wins in the long term. So we've always been about like, let's not cut corners, right? Like this is like you said earlier, a marathon, not a sprint. Like obviously we're looking for like there's 100x growth levers, but everything should be done with a level of precision, which is important, especially when you're building like a developer tool like we are. Like developers are smart, that you can't have the same, I'd say, flexibility with your positioning, but also your tactics as, let's say, a fast fashion brand, where there isn't necessarily, you're not necessarily building such, or, isn't as important, I'd say, your trust. So, yeah, I'd say like in an industry like ours, the final thing I'll say also is the bar is actually lower. Like when you enter new industries, you enter new technologies, you actually can stand out really quickly by being the mature ones, by, putting an extra bit of effort into your design or art direction, or making sure that your copy is just a little bit more refined, because it is such a kind of Wild West cowboy industry that you get a lot of people who, just doesn't feel serious, doesn't feel professional. And so I'd say that we put a lot of effort early on to do work which made us appear probably more mature and more professional than they actually were, which is, a team of 4 people sat in a room trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah, you raised some very important points there. I think that idea that what safe is going to look different for everyone, because the challenge, and I suppose the art in what we do, is finding that balance between the thing that is maximum attention and finding space to be playful and join conversations, but consistently show up in a way where you know who you are. And you're right, you're a serious technology business that is trying to garner the attention of developers, smart, skeptical people that spend a lot of time online. That's a really hard target audience. So there probably isn't a quick fix to garner the audience you want to. You just kind of have to show up in a consistent way and just give value after value after value and pull those tactical levers that you have successfully done. So I think in part when I think about building trust, it often starts with just this really high level of self-awareness. And I think you have to resist the urge to fall into those traps of chasing vanity and make sure that your decisions are guided by an objective measurement framework that isn't just, again, the things that we speak about like scale. I saw a tweet from someone, a social media manager that used to work with us, and it got lots of attention, and it was basically just saying, hey, don't overthink it. My most successful, most viral posts were like, shower thoughts, or as I was walking down the stairs. It was something of that nature. And I thought, yes, true. And that's probably true in the sense of like those little spark moments, but you're never going to build a really thoughtful, precise, intentional brand. Brand building's like so fucking difficult. Yeah. It's probably the hardest undertaking. If we take Steve Jobs' analogy of trust, building trust happens over time. And it is done by just relentless, consistent meeting expectations and promises. And I really do love the analogy around withdrawals and deposits. And we've had these conversations before. The game is just to have more deposits than withdrawals. And every time we do something wrong, sometimes, catastrophically wrong, it's a big withdrawal, right? Sometimes it's a little withdrawal, but I think if you distill it down into that, suddenly you have a framework to start to build trust in hard environments, but there are no shortcuts. I don't think there are. You can lend trust. I do believe, like, although people are skeptical, I've always said, influencer marketing is a way to steal credibility. Partnerships with more reputable brands are also a way to hijack, I call it attention hijacking or credibility hijacking or validation, working. And it also, one of the things I think is really important about partnerships of many kinds is they give you a forum to speak about you in a way that you wouldn't speak about you. If I came on here, Catman, and went, you know what, Catty, I am a linked influencer, and, I drop these little clips every single week. If I said something like that to you, you think, is this guy been smoking all day? However, every so often, someone says to me, oh, Oliver, you're the LinkedIn guy. If I call myself the LinkedIn guy, what a knobhead. Yeah. You get the point. There are things you can say about yourself, and there are things that others can say about you, and I think you can find space. And that is the foundation of trust, finding the right voices to talk about you, having the right frameworks, having the right goals, and just showing up doing great shit every day. Boom.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much spot on. And I think we also live in a time where it's actually, if you really want to build trust, like, it's actually easier than it used to be to do that, because I think people now have much deeper, like, parasocial relationships with founders. Like, it's kind of, it feels like a more recent thing where like, your company 10, 20 years ago, it is a bit more of a black box, because people did just trust that the company did the thing. Now, actually, people will follow the people building the company, and they'll want to hear from them exactly how it's done. And so the playbook's kind of there. Like, if you want to build trust, you have the channels of your founders are now these direct, lines to your customers, and you can literally speak about, these are the decisions we make, these are the reasons behind the decisions we make, and people will listen. People want to listen. They want to hear from the founders, the people building these companies. And so the playbook is there to actually build trust quite easily. Now, the other side of this is, if you're unprepared and you do it badly, it's a very, very quick way to lose trust. I think we talked about it last week with the OpenAI, CTO in an interview, not being able to answer how their video model is trained on publicly available data. Like, immediately then, okay, well, then it doesn't work, because you're not ready to really open the black box. And so it goes both ways. Like, I think the playbook is very clear for people. You now have founder channels. You have numerous communication channels to build trust with your audience.
It reminds me of, there's real irony in it. It feels that there's paradoxes all around us in marketing. The idea that it's harder than ever to communicate today because of the environment. It's also, in some respects, if you do the right things, it's easier than ever. The speed at which you can gain an unfair advantage through telling an authentic story, whether that's founders, whether that's employee advocacy. You guys are really active, and so the team. What do you talk about this internally? Is that part of your mandate to kind of get the team, or are they just like, are you just guys passionate builders that just want to talk about Third Web and what you're doing? How do you get people talking?
I know it's hard. Honestly, man, it's hard. Like, it's been a concerted effort that we have communicated to the team that in order for us to win, we have to tell the story about our company. We have to tell the story of our product, especially with engineers and developers, because actually developers and engineers, they don't really listen to brand accounts. They don't listen to company accounts. They listen to other engineers, other developers. So actually our messaging needs to come from our team. And it's like not an obvious thing, right? Because there's this kind of weird, vague relationship between your personal profile and your company profile. Not everybody wants to tie those two identities. And, what if the employee leaves? And, there's all these like question marks. But we've made it a big concerted effort that, the senior leaders at least should talk about the company, and everybody should be content creators is the other thing, right? Like, and this is another thing that engineers we've kind of had to build into the culture, is that engineers should be writing content. Same with it. I think it's the same with people who work on product. If you're a tech company, I think it's the same if you're a marketing agency, if you're strategists, whoever, people should be writing content. That should be not part of the job description necessarily, but if they're passionate about their role, it's going to take them 10x further, and it's going to take the company 10x further. So no, it's definitely a concerted effort, and it's something we're still trying to improve on.
Yeah. We've had a similar experience. There's been moments where I would say that we've produced things or done things or hit milestones where the team and everybody's really proud and everybody's willing to get behind something. We try not to overkill those moments. If we have certain important company announcements, we send them inwards. We try and lower the barrier by creating the asset, giving some instructions or some copy so people can just copy and paste. And we do the classic thunderclap. This is going live tomorrow at this time. Would appreciate everyone participating. One thing that I did think about when I go, we both agree that if you can find advocacy is kind of the utopia that we should all be chasing in marketing. Yep. And if you're employee advocacy is one lever. Customer advocacy, if you find your most passionate customers that buy the most things from you, if you can figure out a way for them to advocate for you and share and talk about you, these are all big marketing unlocks. Whether you're the biggest brand in the world or you're just starting, I typically have the same advice. Find a way to unlock advocacy. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about in startups is this idea that if something isn't mandated, it won't happen. And this is true not just in startups, but anyone who's busy. The minute things become optional, they just don't happen. They might happen for 1 week, it might happen for 2 weeks. And I see this, without, to your point, that relentless effort. So this part of me goes, I do wonder, and I've heard this being talked about a lot in kind of maybe social media manager circles, saying, hey, you should pay me if you want me to talk about the company, or like initiatives where companies are paying employees for creating content for them. What do you think of that? And is that maybe a line too far? What's like your initial reaction?
Yeah, I think the output becomes
inauthentic.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It lacks any real kind of substance and heart. It's a really difficult one because you can't really force people to do it because it's going to come out poor quality. What I think you do need to do is identify the people who do have it and are able to, are able to craft a really great message and enjoy the process, enjoy the creative process, and double down on them. Like, how do we get those to a stage? Because it's going to follow Pareto's law, right? Where there's 20% of the people doing it are probably going to yield 80% of the results anyway. So I think it's less about having hard restrictive laws in place, like everyone must post this much, but who are the people that are great at it and how do we double down on them?
Yeah, you're right. Obligations, when you're obliged to do things, we have a natural resistance to them.
Yep.
Equally, conversely, if things are optional, we also usually drop and prioritize things that you have to do. Probably something we all have to get better at, and I certainly do, is when I have one-to-one conversations with people, I'll say to them, you're a great writer, you have wonderful ideas. Don't do this for us. Don't get me wrong, my agenda is you represent Flight Story in a great way with great ideas. That's beautiful for us. However, do it for yourself. You create digital leverage that is currency. It is real-world currency that you can go spend. And it will help you here at Flight Story. It will help you on any chapter. It will give you so much authority in your domain. I actually think there's probably a greater responsibility to sell the value as opposed to you have to do this or you should do this. And if we as advocates advocate hard enough, you would hope people would pick that up, right?
Yeah. You take it with you, right? Like the respect and the audience you build, it goes everywhere with your career. Yeah.
It's a bank, and it's the beautiful analogy articulated by Steve Jobs. It literally is a deposit, and every time you spend the time and commitment to do that, you're depositing something in your own brand.
Yep.
I feel like we should end there, Catman, because that was a fantastic line by me. We have gone from autonomous vehicles to solving the world's problems all the way through to personal. I don't know how we do it with these 5 words I've written on my phone below me, but God, we did it. Good man. Good to see you. I'll see you next week.
See you next week.